Hello horror fans, it's that time of year again when I give you my annual rundown of my favourite horror films for the last 12 months. Now, 2012 has been a rather good year for horror, I thought, so it was a bit of a tricky choice as to which films to include for this year's Golden Chainsaw Awards, but I finally managed to whittle it down to about 10 titles. As always, the list is in no particular order and my decisions were based purely on whether or not I enjoyed these. How popular they were at the box office or how much critical acclaim they got did not factor into any of my decisions, so some of my choices may seem a little bit unusual. But anyway, to kick things off with, the first of my films of the year is Iron Sky. Now, this was a very funny dark sci-fi comedy about a group of Nazis that have established a secret base on the dark side of the moon and now want to reinvade the Earth to establish the Fourth Reich. Now, the film is just as daft as it sounds, but it's a great fun and has a very comic book feel to it. I love the look of the Nazi base, which had a very retro-futuristic steampunk feel to it, and the film has a very good cast, which includes German horror actor Udo Kier as the Space Fuhrer, which I thought was kind of awesome. I also particularly like the character of Washington, the hapless astronaut, as played by James Kirby, who starts off as the comic stooge but ends up as one of the main heroes. It's not strictly a horror in the true sense of the word, but it was bloody good fun. I actually did a review of this one on my YouTube channel earlier this year and said pretty much the same thing. If you love Mars Attacks, then you should love this. It should have really had a mainstream cinema release in my view. Instead it just got shoved pretty much direct to disc, which I think was a huge mistake as this would have been great fun to watch with an audience. Anyway, next on the list we have The Woman in Black. An effective ghostly chiller set at the turn of the 20th century, starring Daniel Radcliffe. Now obviously Radcliffe was looking for a more adult role than his previous movies when he signed up for this ghostly period drama. The story for this one sees him playing a solicitor who's been sent to a remote mansion to take care of the legal paperwork for one of their deceased clients. But no sooner does he arrive in the village than ghostly goings-on quickly ensue, followed by a series of bizarre tragedies. Now, I wasn't actually sure if I was going to like this when I first went to see it, but was actually pleasantly surprised. It does differ from the original novel considerably in places, but even so, it's a very entertaining ghost story. It was actually produced by the legendary Hammer Films, and is definitely one of their better productions from recent years. I particularly like the twist in the ending, but I can't really go into details about that without spoiling things, but overall I was very impressed. I did actually review the original TV version of this film on my channel earlier this year if you want to check that one out as well. But anyway, moving on, the next film on the list is The Chernobyl Diaries. Now this one was just basically a twist on the old Tourist in Peril theme, this one being about a group of holiday makers that go on one of these extreme tours to look around the former Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Eastern Europe, only to end up fighting for their lives against something rather unfriendly that's living in the ruins of the nearby town. Whilst the basic plot was by no means original, what that made this film stand out from its contemporaries for me was its effective use of its location footage, being filmed in and around the former Chernobyl power plant and the nearby town of Pripyat, which has stood pretty much empty since the reactor blew its stack in the mid-80s. If you've seen pictures of this place online, then you'll know just how genuinely creepy this place is in real life, and I felt the film did an excellent job of capturing the desolate atmosphere of the place. Anyway, next up we have The Pact. Now this one was a bit of a slowie as it's not exactly an action film and does take some time building up to its climax, but it was an interesting one as you're not immediately sure if it's meant to be a ghost story or a straightforward murder mystery. The plot being basically about this girl's sister who's gone missing while staying at the former family homestead. As the film goes on you begin to think there's some sort of malevolent spirit at work in the house. But when more people start to go missing, you begin to wonder if there's something else going on there. But again, you're not sure if the events in the house are being caused by something or someone right up until the very end. Now, I'm not usually into these slow burners, but I actually thought it was really well done and did a fantastic job of keeping you off balance as to what was happening in the house until right to the film's climax. It was also kind of interesting seeing a somewhat older looking Casper Van Dien in this, playing a gruff detective who looks a hell of a lot greyer now than he did back in his Starship Trooper days. On a similar theme, I'd also like to recommend the film Sinister. This was another ghostly tale, this time about a true crime novelist, played by Ethan Hawke, that moves his family into a house where a string of grisly murders took place. Now he's hoping to produce another best-selling book and hopes to find out who the killer might have been, but as he starts to investigate the deaths, he finds that the killer might actually be leaving him clues as to his true identity. Now, the film starts off as a straightforward murder mystery, but as it gets going, you begin to suspect there's something supernatural going on, and again, it's not until the very end that you find out what's happening. Again, I really enjoyed this one. There were parts that I thought were very cleverly done. I mean, there's a scene at the start showing some Super 8 footage of one of the murders, and it's not till you see it again later on in the film that you realise something else is happening in the background, and that's when the film begins to take a sinister twist, as it were. Well worth checking out if you haven't seen it. Keeping with the theme of creepy houses, my next film is The House at the End of the Street. Now, this was one of those films about finding that you've just moved in next to some creepy neighbours, that something bad had happened in their house many years ago. And no, it isn't The Burbs. Now, it was quite good as you first get the impression that the weirdo next door is actually just a nice kid who's been misunderstood and is actually the victim of bullying by snooty neighbours. But then as the film goes on, you begin to suspect perhaps there is something slightly wrong with him and the house he's living in. I certainly enjoyed it anyway, and it was good to see Elizabeth Shue from Piranha 3D in this, playing the overprotective drunken mother. Changing pace for our next title, we have Piranha 3 Double D. Oh yes! Now, given how much I love the original, I just had to include the sequel in this year's favourites. It was good cheesy fun which sees those nasty piranhas from the first film invade a water park after the owner decides to save on his water bills by tapping into an underground spring. Hilarity quickly ensues as they proceed to chow down on the patrons, producing some spectacular gory scenes. Now, I will admit that this was not as good as the original, but it was still a good laugh. I like the way Christopher Lloyd and Ving Rhames return to reprise their earlier roles. Indeed, Rhames arguably manages to steal the film when he appears right at the end. I also like the way they got Gary Busey and the mighty David Hasselhoff in this to make guest appearances. So, yeah, whilst it might not win any Academy Awards, I thought it was really good fun. My only gripe is that if you want to see this on 3D at home, then you'll have to buy the Blu-ray and have one of those special 3D TVs, as unlike the previous movie, they've decided not to bother with a 3D version for the DVD release, which I think is kind of crap. Anyway, the next one of my favourites in my list of films of the year is Underworld Awakening. Oh yes, Kate Beckinsale as a foxy female vampire in skin-tight leather and PVC, firing guns and killing werewolves. I mean, what more do you need for a good evening's entertainment? I've always had a soft spot for the Underworld films, and this fourth film in the series didn't disappoint. Now, this one takes place in the near future where the vampires and lycans have all been but hunted to extinction, and our main protagonist ends up hooking up with a small group of vampire survivors when she finds out those pesky werewolves are on the rise again. There's some great action scenes in this and a good supporting cast, which includes Charles Dance as a vampire leader and Stephen Rea as an evil scientist. Whilst I appreciate that the Underworld films aren't to everybody's taste, I've always found them to be good fun, and they're still a million times better than those bloody awful Twilight films. In my view, this is how a decent film featuring vampires and werewolves should be made. Next in the list we have Cockneys vs Zombies, a hilarious film about a zombie outbreak in the East End of London, in which a group of incompetent bank robbers have to try and rescue their friends and relatives from an old folks' home. Now, this for me was one of the funniest films of the year, and it's a great pity that it didn't get a wider theatrical release. I saw this at a film festival earlier in the year, and it went down a storm. However, it only had a limited run at the cinema, and then went almost straight to DVD. Now, what was fun about it is it starts off with these clueless idiots trying to rob a bank, which all goes terribly wrong, and then ends up with these fairly well-known elderly British actors, including Alan Ford, Honor Blackman, Richard Brars, and that god that used to play Tinker in Lovejoy, all hobbling about on Zimmer frames and in wheelchairs, blasting all these zombies with automatic weapons. It's a kind of cross between Lock, Stock and Shaun of the Dead, and found it to be bloody good fun. If you like Shaun of the Dead, again, you should enjoy this one also. Now, this brings me to my final film in my list of movies of the year. Now, it was a bit of a tough choice, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to disagree with me here, but my personal choice for the best horror film of 2012 goes to The Cabin in the Woods. Now, I know this film has caused some division amongst horror fans, but I thought it was brilliant. I mean, it starts off as just like another Evil Dead rip-off, with some youths going to a remote log cabin in the middle of nowhere and end up getting attacked by zombies, but there's a huge twist in the plot. It turns out that everything that's going on around them is being controlled by some secret organisation, and that they're all part of some elaborate game that they're playing with them. The film was very tongue-in-cheek, and I particularly liked the character of Marty, the group's resident stoner, who we find isn't quite so dumb, and as the film progresses, turns out to be the film's main hero. It was also kind of interesting seeing that guy who played Thor in a different role, along with a certain noted horror actress who makes a guest appearance at the end, but I won't say who for the benefit of those who haven't seen this yet. It was produced by Joss Whedon, who did the Buffy and Angel TV show, so I know that this won't appeal to all tastes, but I really enjoyed it and thought it was as funny as hell. Anyway, that's about all for this year. Now, I know that people probably strongly disagree with some of the titles that I've picked out, but again, these are just the ones that I personally really enjoyed, so feel free to disagree with me. It should also be borne in mind that I haven't seen every horror film that was released this year, so there might be other titles that I might have included had I been able to see them. Now, before I sign off, there's a couple of films that I'd just like to mention that came out early this year, which you probably won't have had a chance to see because they only had a limited release and aren't out on disc yet. Now, the first of these is Stitches, starring comedian Ross Noble, who plays an unsavoury clown that comes back from the dead to wreak murder and mayhem. And the second is the film Sightseers, which is about a psychopathic couple who go on holiday and end up leaving a string of dead bodies strewn all over the English countryside. I can't comment on how good or bad any of these are, as I haven't been able to see them yet. I have heard mixed reviews about Stitches, but it sounded like such a fun idea that I had to just mention it to you. I've also heard very good things about Sightseer, so be sure to check that one out when you get the chance. Both of these titles will be out on disc sometime in the new year. Anyway, that's all for my films of 2012, so please be sure to rate, comment and subscribe. I've got more review videos in the pipeline which I'll be uploading shortly, so be sure to stay tuned for those. Also, check out my website for more reviews and recommendations. You can also follow us on Facebook, links to which are in the bar below. In the meantime, I'd just like to take this opportunity to say thank you all very much for watching my videos over the years, and to wish you all a very happy horror film 2013.